Hey folks, Jim Zaspel here. As you know, I'm a big proponent of the rehabbing and selling of properties. Buy, fix, and sell a lot of properties. And a question I get a lot is, Jim, what should I do if my rehab goes over budget? So have you ever wondered, what should you do if your project goes over budget? Maybe you're even in a spot where the potential for a project to go over budget has kept you from taking the action to move forward to even do a deal, right? So let me rewind, and I do this a lot of times because a lot of the stuff I learn through adversity. Smart people learn from other people's successes. I tend to learn from my own mistakes and then fix it and then not make that mistake again. So that's me. But anyway, so my first rehab project I ever did was at 157 Jackson Avenue in Glenside, and it was just a nightmare on so many levels. I paid too much for the property, which is the biggest and first mistake. And next, I hired a contractor without pre-screening them. Then come to find out, my contractor's dead broke, using my money from that project to finish the last one. And then I made a very big mistake. And instead of being upfront and proactive in communicating with my lender on the deal, I just kind of buried my head in the sand for about 8 months or so, and then ultimately worked stuff out with her. But that was a big boo-boo, big learning lessons. So lots of learning lessons. Could spend a whole day telling you all the stuff I learned on that project. But the one thing I did learn is that you got to be prepared for a project to go over budget, right? So let me ask you a question. If you've bought a house for, because we all have the maximum what's called loan-to-value ratio, which is simply a percentage of the after-repaired value that you're willing to borrow, right? So we've kind of got different ranges. It ranges from 65 to 75%, what we call LTV, loan-to-value ratio. So if the ARV on a property is less than $200,000, I'm not going to borrow more than 65% of that $200,000. Okay, so to clarify what that means, if the after repaired value, meaning what the house is going to sell for, is $200,000, I'm not going to borrow more than $130,000 on that deal, right? If the ARV is between $200,000 and $300,000, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to borrow up to about 70% loan to value. So let's say, for simple math, because I'm on the fly here, let's say the after repaired value is $300,000. What's 70% of that? That would be $210,000. I might go like $215,000, something like that. And so the point is, even if the deal, so you're never going to borrow more than $210,000, and out of that, if you're borrowing private money, you typically pay your closing costs and stuff like that out of the borrowed money. If the ARV is over $300,000, I'll borrow 75% LTV. Hopefully, you get the point by now. All right. So let's say, excuse me. Let's say it is a $250,000 property, $250,000 property, and you've borrowed 70% of that. What would that be? 70, 140, 175, right? So the after repaired value is $250,000. You borrowed $175,000. Why only 70%? Because that's the most that you can borrow safely to allow for all the costs in the transaction, financing, closing costs, commissions, etc., holding costs, maintenance, property taxes, and maybe, if necessary, dip in the market and still have a margin there to pay you and your lender back, right? So, where was I? Oh yeah, so let's say you've borrowed that $175,000 on the $250,000 deal. You're plenty safe, you're good. So you've borrowed $175,000. Let's say, not counting closing costs and stuff like that, just for easy math. Let's say that you bought it for $100,000 and that you're putting in $75,000 of work. Are you setting yourself up for success on that deal, yes or no? The answer is absolutely not, unless you've got the personal cash to fund any overages on the construction. Now, don't delude yourself into thinking that there will not be overages. Especially if you're new in the business, I promise you, there will be extras on the construction. So then you've got to ask yourself, before you get in the deal, what are you going to do in the event that there is an overage on the construction? Right? So if you've borrowed $175,000, you bought it for $100,000, you put in $75,000, and now you got a $5,000 boo-boo, what you going to do? All right. So I'm going to answer this question again, what to do if there's an overage, two different ways. One being plan on that and allow for it ahead of time. Okay? In other words, on that kind of deal, you should have bought it for less than 100 grand, right? So that you could borrow the 175, and let's say you bought it for 90 and you had to put in the 75 grand construction. Now you're in for 165. You get a $10,000 cushion. That's not $10,000 for you to go to Vegas with. That's $10,000 for you to set aside for that one project. Okay? So that's how to prevent the situation. All right, but maybe you're watching this video and you're in the situation of having bought a property and you don't have the money to fund it yourself, or maybe you do, but you're over budget. What do you do? All right. So the first thing you're gonna do, if the project goes over budget, ask yourself, is there a less expensive workaround? Okay. Next is ask yourself, if there's not, how far over budget are you? And typically, the best way to do it is to come up with the cash yourself. So say you're 10 or 15 grand over budget, you ought to come up with that cash yourself. And once you're up and running in your business, you ought to have some reserves for just such a situation. Okay? But let's say that you didn't plan for it and you don't have the cash yourself. And back to this example, you borrowed 175, and let's say you borrowed 100% financing. You bought it for 100. 75 grand rehab, but now you need 80 grand rehab or 85 grand rehab. Where's that 10 grand going to come from? Okay. Well, there's a few different options you've got, and none of them are great, but some are better than others. And as I see it, there are exactly these few options I'll lay out for you. Okay. One, which is probably the worst, is to go back to your lender and say, listen, here's where I'm at in the deal. Here's the project. Here's the problem. Here's the overage. Can I borrow $10,000 more money? Now, careful. If you're dealing with a hard money lender, it's okay for you to ask that question because they're sophisticated enough, they know enough about the business to say yes or no based on their level of protection of the deal. They might want part of the profit, which is fine, right? If you're borrowing money from a private lender and you ask that question, don't do it because you've already borrowed your maximum LTV. The reality is the private lender, somebody who's not as knowledgeable about this business, would probably say, sure, do I give the check to you personally or how does this work? You don't want to borrow more than a certain LTV unless that person becomes an equity partner in the deal. So don't ask that question. If it's a private lender, it's not good to ask if it's a hard money lender, and the answer is probably going to be no. All right, so then what do you got? What are your other options? Well, you could ask your contractor, say, listen, I only budgeted so much. This really sucks. If you fork over the $10,000, if you front the $10,000 for this overage, what if I gave you 10 or 20% of the profit of the deal when it sells? It's worth throwing it out there. They'll probably say yes. If they're not, living hand to mouth, they'll probably say yes. The other way to do it is to borrow the money from a personal loan or borrow it from somebody else. And I'm not saying, hey, can I just, can you lend me 10 grand, 20 grand, whatever it is. What I'm saying is you want to make that person, you'll probably wind up having to make that person an equity partner in the deal, meaning they get paid a portion of the profit, up to 50% of the profit when the deal sells, okay? And if it's a seasoned person, somebody came to me with that question, one, I'd want to analyze the numbers of the deal very closely to see if there even was going to be any profit and evaluate the documentation, etc. And then I'd want to have other assurances as well. So it's a really crappy situation to find yourself in, but one of the worst things you can do is bury your head in the sand and let construction stop on the project. So if you're out of money on the deal and you're over budget, you got to ask yourself, is there still money to be made in the deal? And even if there is not, you still got to finish it and get your lenders paid back, right? But just evaluate your options. Go to the lender, go to your contractor, go to someone else, and be willing to offer equity in the deal as an exchange for the loan. So in other words, they get their 10 grand back plus half the profit in the deal. Now, let's say that there's $40,000 profit in the deal, and they're only lending you $10,000. Is it fair for them to lend 10, get their 10 back plus another 10? Absolutely, maybe 20. It's all about supply and demand. You kind of need that money, and so that might be something that you'd have to fork over. So don't be greedy. If your back's up against the wall, don't be greedy. Be most concerned with getting the deal closed, and that is extremely, extremely important. All right, hopefully that helps you out, and stay tuned to jimzaspel.com for more awesome, super awesome training videos to help you make more money and protect yourself in your real estate investing business. I'll catch you next time.